Hello, everyone. Hi. How you doing? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, my AirPods. I'm trying to connect to my AirPods. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, guess not.
All right. Okay, let's see. We've got 2 more minutes. I'm going to start the live stream on YouTube. This is week 9.2, and we're going to be talking about data-driven web applications. Bring this over here. Minimize that. And I'm going to share my screen. All right, can you all see my screen?
We can see it.
All right, awesome. And let me bring up the chat. All right. I'm gonna, all right, let's see, leave that over here. All right, if you have any questions, just, put them on the chat. All right, let's see. All right, welcome everyone. Let's see, we got 15 folks. Let's have folks just as they trickle in. All right, let's take a look at the agenda, see where we are. All right. All right, so let's see. We're right about here. We talk about, well, I want to apologize for missing Tuesday. I wasn't feeling very well. I did record a video to introduce you to the new assignment and also topic. We do need to have a user interface to be able to interact with a relational database that we've been working for the last couple of months, and we could have picked any of different options for user interfaces. I happen to pick a user interface library and solution that is very popular and out there in industry, which is it's a library, JavaScript library that allows you to very easily generate dynamic web applications, and it's definitely worthwhile exploring. If you're familiar with it, that's great. If you're not, the assignment that I introduced in my latest video, I walk you through using a project that you can clone down and get become productive very quickly, interacting with a relational database, retrieving data and pumping it out to a user interface. So we're going to be focusing a little more today on that. And the intent of these two assignments, the assignment 7 and assignment 8, is to get you going with something that you can start implementing some kind of application. and hopefully you'll find it useful for getting started with your final project. There is a final project which is due I believe the 26th of April, and the intent is that you can start using the technologies that we already have for creating this final project. Obviously, you'll need to design a database of your own that illustrates many of the same things that we've been talking about all semester, right? We need to have classes that represent some kind of objects, also relationships between those objects, different types of associations like one-to-many relationships, many-to-many relationships, self-references. So we've talked about how to implement this all throughout the semester. So you'll need to do the same thing, right? But for something that you choose. You're going to be choosing a topic of which you want to build something, and you'll come up with some UML diagram. You come up with a SQL that creates the tables and the relationships and foreign keys and whatnot. You'll populate the database, and then you need to start interacting with it, right? You need to exercise it, and so you'll need to create some kind of either JDBC or ORM of how to connect and communicate with the database. You're free to use other solutions if you prefer not to use Java. That's totally fine. For your final project, you're free to use any other mechanism for connecting to the database. If you're familiar from perhaps other courses that you might have taken, and you feel more comfortable with a Python solution or whatever other languages you feel more comfortable, then by all means, you can use that instead. For the front end, I'm introducing the React.js library. Again, it's a very worthwhile skill to put under your belt and definitely explore further. We have a whole course on web development that's is very, very popular. I welcome you and encourage you to explore that as well. But we're giving you the tools to just get going, right? To enough to make you dangerous, that you can be productive and start interacting with a database. So we'll go over what with what I already discussed in the previous lecture that I made available. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at that. If not, we're going to go over it fully here and move further than we went in that lecture. So let's see what's coming up. We'll finish discussing web applications today. And next week, we're going to be talking about optimizing the database. Right, we've talked about that we can design the database to reduce redundancy and make sure that it maintains referential integrity by doing normalization and so on and so forth. Right, so there are other things that we can do to improve the performance of databases and also make sure that as we're implementing applications that are not designed just for one user but for multiple users, right? Especially if you have a web application, right? You're not going to have just one user using that database. Usually will be dozens, hundreds, thousands of users using the database simultaneously. We need to take care that the database is configured to support this kind of interaction. So transactions is going to allow us to do that. Where you have multiple things happening at the same time in a database, it needs to be configured to support that. So we'll talk about that next week, transactions and indexing. We'll also take a look at non-relational database solutions. Up to this point, all semester we've been talking about relational databases, right, and SQL, MySQL in particular. But there's tons of other alternative ways of storing databases, storing data, interacting with data, and in particular, non-relational databases are becoming very, very popular. There's tons of new solutions out there that allow you to store data and interact with the data not using SQL or SQL, right? And so we'll talk about two of them in particular. We'll talk about MongoDB, and we'll talk about Firebase as two of the more interesting two particular and very popular implementations of non-relational databases. What I'm thinking is that the last couple of weeks, there's other topics that we might want to discuss, but I did want to leave them open so that we can focus on working on the project. I'll go a little further on how you might implement some more complex things such as one-to-many, using ORMs and using configuring the database to support that. And also, if you want to support folks being able to identify themselves and logging in and things like that, we can talk about that, or maintaining session information as users come and go and identify themselves with the system. Also, configuring what is that one user could do but other users can't do. How do you configure those kinds of things? So we can talk about a lot of things that you might need for the project. So I want to leave those 2 weeks open to talk about some open-ended discussion and to help out, get you going further into completing your final project. Okay. Let's see. Then obviously we'll have on the 14th, we will have the last lecture, and we're hoping to have the final exam that day. Actually, what we'll do is probably same thing that we did for the first exam, right? We'll open up the exam and then give you 3-4 days for you to take the exam any time that is more convenient for you. Okay. All right. Any questions of where we are, where we're going? About the assignments 7 and 8, as I mentioned in a post, I've merged both. Well, not merged. Assignment 7, assignment 8. Basically, I made them do the same day, the day of assignment 8. So DB8, whatever DB8 is due, I think it's due on the 26th. So that's next Friday. So DB7 will also be due. Same thing on Friday, March 26th. Okay, so I guess I should change this, right? So they're both due the same day. Let me copy that and paste it here. Paste. So they're both due when DB8 is due. Right? They're very related to one another. One of them is DB7 focuses on how is it that an application can interact with the database, right? How can I connect to a database and start extracting data or sending data or manipulating the data? And then assignment 8 builds on that and says, okay, well, now that I have a layer that can talk to the database, how can I build an application, a user interface on top of that so that it can talk to the database directly? Okay, and so yeah, I know that many of you have had. Yeah, I'll talk about quizzes 6 in a second. I know a lot of you have had problems of actually connecting to the database, and I've offered some additional office hours. This morning, I had an extra office hours at 11. I had a few folks come in, and we were able to help them. I will offer other extra office hours over the weekend if you want to come, perhaps maybe tomorrow morning, and so that please come with questions and we can help you connect to the databases, right? If you're having trouble, the TAs as well, I've told them to offer extra office hours to help you work through DB7 and DB8. These assignments, they are designed to just walk you through completing it, right? We're not asking you to do anything beyond what we walk you, step by step, telling you how to complete the tasks. And again, the intent is to just get you going, right? Give you something to where you can build off of that and work on your final project. All right. Quiz 6, I just moved quiz 6 to next week. So there's no quiz today. So next Friday, there will be quiz number 6, and that will be on object relational mapping, because you're still kind of working on that. And so I didn't want to put a quiz on something that you're just getting started and getting going and getting up to speed on that. So I moved the quiz 6 to next week. Okay, so next Friday. All right. Okay, any questions? All right, so if there are no questions, let's take a look at the assignment that is ongoing. Assignment number 8. DB8. Right. So assignment number 8 is designed for us to practice how to interact, how to create a user interface that can interact with a database, right? We have a database it's the same one that we've been working with, right? That you can clone down, right? We give you a link to the database so you can clone down, and the database looks something like this. In DB Design, we have the users table that has these users: Alice, Bob, Tim, Elon, Charlie, and Daniel, right? And we want to be able to interact with it. Okay, so we walk you in this assignment on creating 2 pieces of user screens, 2 screens. One of them they call user list that just displays the content of this particular table, right? So here we have Bob, Tim, Elon, Charlie, and Daniel, and just list them as just a plain list. Okay, and there's a separate button that if you click on it, right, it navigates to a different screen. So 2 screens, right? This assignment walks you to implement 2 screens. So in this additional screen, when you navigate, if you click on a particular user, it lets you edit that user. Okay, and the way it works is that when you click on it, it goes off to the database. Well, actually, no, it navigates here and it passes the ID. Of that user as part of the URL up here. Okay, and then this screen uses that information of which user you clicked on to fetch that user from the database, right? And then it renders that user as a form, and then you can edit it. You can edit everything except the ID, right? So you can't edit the primary key, and so you can edit the first name, the last name, username, password, whatnot, right? And you can save, and save sends the content to the server. It updates the server, and then it navigates back to this list over here. Alternatively, right, you can click on the user, and then you can click on delete, and this will send a delete command to the database so that the record is removed. Or you can just cancel and then go back to the list of users. Alternatively, you can click on add user. So if we click on add user, it navigates to the editor with nothing in it. It's blank because presumably it's a brand new user. And then you can type the user information, the new user information, and click on create, and then it updates, it inserts that user in the database, and it comes back, right? And then you should be able to see that brand new user that you just added. Okay. So the first part just walks you through importing the database, cloning down the project, which we did in the lecture that I recorded earlier for you, that I posted, that you should have seen already, but we'll go over that content today. It does ask you to review some of the code that we are giving you. And so, for instance, it asks you to take a look at the data model, which is basically this this class over here, right? The user class. Make sure that you understand that it's an entity, that it's mapped to a particular table, that it's declared as a primary key. The ID is because of the primary key, and it's an auto increment, right? So make sure that you understand that part. It also asks you to take a look at some of the other things, such as the repository, user repository, right? Which again, we're giving you, and it's the same one. I believe it's the same one that from DB7, right? Identical. Basically, it just overrides 2 functions: the find all and the find by ID. Okay, and it's configured to interact with the user table. It also asks you to, I believe, review the ORM DAO. This ORM DAO, this is basically the solution to DB7, right? DB7 asks you to implement this, But this is basically the solution. Okay. Well, actually, no, right? We did make a couple of changes in DB7, right? The implementations of these functions are slightly different. Okay, I believe find all users. I believe that's identical to what we ask you to do. Find user by ID. I believe it's what we ask you to do, right? It's just basically the ID and then retrieves the ID. And delete as well, right? Just delete. What we changed was these mappings, right? These mappings are slightly different from what we gave you, asked you to do in DB7. Okay, let's go over that real quick. So in the assignments that in DB7, right, we asked you all these to be gets, right? At get, at get mapping, blah blah blah. Okay, and that's fine. That totally works. But when you start building more advanced implementations, right, you start considering, what is acceptable in industry. Okay, and there are several conventions in industry when you create these data models that are interacting with a database, right? And so some naming conventions, right? Like for instance, why do we camel case things? Yes. Why is it lowercase and things like that? So those are conventions that the industry has come up with over the years. Okay. So one of those conventions is that if you are making data available accessible through an HTTP interface, right? And not everything should be GET, right? HTTP GET should only be used when you are reading data from the database. Right? If you're retrieving data from a database, then you should use HTTP GET, right? That's just a convention, right? And indeed, that's what we're doing here, right? For when we are retrieving the list of users, then notice that we are using HTTP GET. Right? When we're reading an individual user by their ID, again, we are using HTTP GET. So we're following convention there. Okay. The other convention, right? One of the other conventions is that if you are interacting with a table, right, and the table is called users, there's a naming convention here, right? In relational databases, right? The tables are nouns. They're upper. The case doesn't matter, right? So typically we go with all lowercase, right? So here too, when there's a naming convention that if you are interacting with an entity with the records, you should name them. You should use here nouns, plural nouns, all lowercase, that describe what it is that you're interacting with. And indeed, we are interacting with users. So it just happens to have exactly the same name as a table that we're interacting with. Users is a table name. The noun here is also users. Okay, make sense? So you'll notice that all the URLs end with this. Users, right? They all end with users. See that? Again, because we are following a convention, right? That industry standards. Well, it's not a standard. It's more a kind of like a gentleman's agreement, right? That is how we create these APIs. Another convention is that these URLs should start with a token that identifies this as URLs. That these are HTTP URLs that are referring to data, right? That these are mapped to some database that is extracting data. So they're not meant for human consumption, right? These are only for retrieving data or sending data, right? They're not like it's not a nice HTML page or something, not for consuming by humans, but these are for interacting processes, right? Algorithms that are talking to one another. Let's see, there's a question on the chat. It says, are get mapping, delete mapping, etc. functionally the same? So when you are interacting in with a browser, right, and you just go to anywhere, I don't know, you go to Wikipedia, right? So the browsers, what they do is they send an HTTP GET, right, because they are reading data from that server from wikipedia.org. You can view you can inspect and ask the browser, what are you doing in the network? What's happening in the network? And you refresh, you'll notice that it's reading a whole bunch of things from the servers, right? And if you click on it, you'll notice that these are all get methods. See that, get? Okay, those are, it's sending a get request out to this wikipedia.org server, right? But if it's sending data, if it's sending to the server, okay, the convention is that we don't use get, right? We use post or put. Okay, so there are a whole bunch of methods that the HTTP that the HTTP protocol, network communication protocol, has many different types of methods that go back and forth: get, post, put, delete. Okay, and it's just a token. It's just an extra part of the communication, just to distinguish what is it that you want to do with the data. Are you reading the data? Are you sending the data? Are you modifying the data? Are you removing the data? Okay, and again, these are all just conventions. So, but internally, obviously, they are all basically the same, right? It's just a string, big string that's being sent, a whole bunch of bits, zeros and ones that are being sent over, right? But logically, they mean different things, okay? So delete, by delete, it means that the method here, this method, would not be a get, it would be a delete, okay? We can configure our endpoint to listen for this incoming URL, that if you see a delete method, then execute this function, right? So if you see a delete method come in and the URL looks like this, then execute this function, okay? I have a couple more. Notice that these two are identical. See these URLs? They're identical. How are they distinguished? Well, in one of them, I'm sending a get from somewhere. But in this one, I am sending a post. That's how the server, right? This database connection here knows to either execute this function versus this other function, right? Both the same URL, but this will be a get and this will be a post. Okay, and so the convention goes that get are for reading and extracting data from the database, and the convention also says that if you're sending data, new data that you want to insert into the database, the convention says that you should use the post HTTP method. So get for reading and post for inserting. So get for select star from blah, 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 whereas post for insert into the database. That makes sense? And indeed, that's exactly what save does, right? Saves inserts into the database. All right, more convention. If you are modifying something, you're modifying a record that already exists in the database, right? The convention says that you should not use post, you should not use get, you should use the put method, right? Meaning here in the request method, you would see a put, not a get, not a post, it would be a put, okay? So indeed, there it is, put, because we are updating a user, meaning we're updating a record that already exists in the database, right? And also the convention says is that you would append the ID of the record, the primary key of the record that you are updating, you would append it at the end of the URL, right? So this would be /users, and then the ID of the user that you are updating. Make sense? We are reading the ID of the user just like we did in DB7, right? But there's a twist here. The data, the actual new data about the user, right? Maybe we're changing the first name, the last name, password, whatever. Notice that none of that is part of the URL. Instead, the data that we are sending over instead is encoded in the HTTP. So this HTTP, so on the right-hand side, this right-hand side is the HTTP request that is sending, from the browser is sending over to the wikipedia.org. At the bottom, okay, well, you see these are headers. There's another section here which we don't see, is that if I am sending data, right, maybe if I'm filling out a form or something, and I'm sending all that form information over to the server, right, that gets encoded inside of the body of the message, right? There's a body right? That you can put anything in there. You can put an image that you're sending over. Maybe you're uploading an image, or maybe you are uploading a document, right? All that would be part of the body of the data that is being sent over the other network machine. Okay, so that body, right? We need to be able to extract the data from the body, right? So the way we do that is with this request body. My request body is extracting data that we know is formatted as a JSON string, right? We know that it has attributes as first name, last name, and so on and so forth, which are being mapped to instantiate a new object, right, a user object we're copying all the data over from wherever this is coming from, and then we're populating a new user, right? We retrieve the user from the database, right? We know the ID from the user. We retrieve from the database. We update the records, first name, last name, and so on and so forth, all those with the data that is coming from whoever sending this, and then we store it back into the database, right? So we read the record, we update the records, right? And then we save it back with an update into the database, right? Again, the convention is that this would be a put, not a post, not a get, a put, not a delete, and that we're encoding the primary key at the end of the URL. Make sense? And finally, in post, same thing. We are, since this is a new record, there is no primary key, so we're not encoding the primary key, okay? But we are sending presumably a brand new object, right? And encoded inside of the body of the request, which we extract, we instantiate a brand new instance, and then we save that new instance as an insert into the database, okay? Anyway, we are giving you this. We're giving you all this, right? You don't have to worry about this. It should already work. I tried it out with a couple of students in office hours, and it seemed to be working, right? So that looked promising. So hopefully, if you follow the instructions, you should be all good. Could you show an example of using create user? Yes, we're going to do that right now. We're gonna go back and do that from the user interface. Yep. Okay, so yeah, so we're giving you all this. We're giving you all this. So let's head over to the user interface. How is it that we would use this? In particular, as somebody's asking, how would we use this? Okay, let's use that. Okay, what else did we give you? Let's see. We did give you a couple things to get started, which I cover in the assignments, right? I covered in the lecture that I posted, right? I'm not sure if you had a chance to take a look at it, but nevertheless, we're gonna go over it. So from the front end, from the user interface, it all starts with this index.html, right? That's a special name in web jargon. Index is kind of like the main, right, where everything gets started, right? In particular, if you go to wikipedia.org, this wikipedia.org, it means that there's a file called index. Oh, well, maybe they named it something else. I don't know. They might have named it something else, which is the default page that you look at, and usually, not Wikipedia, usually it's called index.html. So this is where we are going to do all of our CRUDing, creating, reading, updating, and deleting. There's some magic stuff here that's happening that you don't have to worry about, right? We are downloading some styling libraries to make this look a little bit more presentable than the default presentation layer. We also load the libraries that allows to use this React.js rendering engine, right? And so all that is configured for you, so you don't have to worry about that. In the lecture, I also discussed creating some really simple screens like home, screen 1, and screen 2, and discuss how is that you can implement just simple navigation on navigating from one screen to the next screen, right? So that's covered in the lecture. So again, I encourage you to go over that, but we'll go over it here quickly. We following this mechanism of being able to navigate between like a home screen and then multiple screens, we implement 3 additional screens. Okay, oh, sorry, 2 screens. We implement 2 screens. One that implements this one screen is going to implement this left-hand side, the user list. This is going to be implemented right here, user list. See that? And the other one is going to implement user editor, which is this one right here. Okay, and we navigate between the 2. Then again, in the lecture that I presented, we create index.js, which is the entry point to our application, kind of like our main, right, where everything gets configured and gets kicked off. Right, in that index, we declare a, in that index, this index here, we declare a component, right, a top-level component, root component, we call it, that is responsible for loading and configuring everything else. Okay, so let's visit that app.js. So app is built using a what we call a React component. It's a component at the very top of a rendering tree, right? That can load many screens, right? It can load components that are contained inside of another, right? And then that's this tree, right? The root is this app over here, right? And you can have multiple screens, and you can decide to show one screen versus another screen. And the way we did that I discussed in the lecture, in the previous lecture, right? We do that using a hash router component that allows us to define multiple screens and allows us to navigate versus one screen or another screen by declaring a whole bunch of routes, right? And saying that if the browser sees /, then it should render this home screen, right? If instead it sees users, then it should render this other user list screen, right? If it sees in the URL, if it sees /users/the ID, some placeholder, then it should render this other screen, right? And in the examples in the previous lecture, where we showed you how to navigate to 2 simple screens, screen 1 and screen 2, mapped to some bogus S1 or /ABC. Okay, since this is /, right? That's kind of like the root of some tree, right? That allows us to navigate some complex navigation structure, right? And so this is the default screen that shows up, right? Because it's mapped to /, right? Let me bring that up. Let me run that for you. You can notice that this is the home screen, right? And let me move this over to the right like that. There we go. Let me show you just both of them. There you go. Yeah, so the way this is implemented is that if we go into the home screen, right, we just have, these are all just functions, right? The components or screens in React are just functions, right? This is a syntax called the arrow function syntax, right? It's a function, right? That's the name of the function. That's a parameter list, right? And this is the body of the function, okay? So whatever that function returns is what gets rendered. So this function is returning this H2, which is this H2 right here, home screen, and then several links. See that that's one of the links, right? And then screen 1, and then screen 2, which is these links over here, screen 1 and screen 2, right? Which if I click on screen 1, right? And again, in the last lecture, we talk about how to implement those simple navigations, right? And what are they doing? These hyperlinks, they are changing the URL at the top of the browser, and then there these when it changes the URL of the browser changes, it kicks off these definitions, right? So home is the default, right? You haven't navigated anywhere. If I click on S1, right, /S1, it kicks off this S1 over here and it renders screen 1. If I click on screen 2, it kicks off /ABC, which then renders screen number 2. Or if I click on /users, right, /users is mapped to navigate where? There it is, user list. See that? Right? Let's see, there's a question in the chat. Do we have to build a configuration to run the HTML files or just run them? Yeah, no, you can just run them. You can just run the index file. There's only one HTML file here, right? Wait a minute, do we have to build a configuration to run HTML? You mean configuration here? This configuration up here? It creates it for you when you run it. If you run it from here, it'll create the configuration here. And then you can run it from here too. You can either run it from here and you say run, or after you've run it the first time, it'll add as a configuration, run configuration here, so you can run it with the arrow. Okay. All right, so let's focus on user list. Right, so when you navigate to user list, right now user list, notice that is successfully reading the list of users from the database, right, and displaying them as a simple list. Okay, so let's look at that, how we implemented that. Okay, so let's go to user list. So what is user list doing? So user list is doing the following, right? Is first loading this this JavaScript library, right, called users service, which we walk you through in the assignment how to implement that, right? Hold on a second. Sorry about that. My dog was sneaking around, and I didn't want her to pee on the carpet. Yeah, so what user list is doing, and again, this is all covered in the previous lecture. I'm just going over it real quick. It's importing user service. Right? User service is responsible for implementing everything that has to do with talking to the server. Okay, it is responsible for talking to the ORM. Right, this user ORM DAO. Right, this one declares all these input all this posts, all these gets, right, get user by ID. It renders, it makes all these functions available at these URLs. Yes. So what we're trying to do for finding all users, if you want to execute this over here, we need to send a get at this URL over here, right? So that's exactly what user service is going to do, right? It wants to talk to this server that is exposing this data from the database at this URL. So find all users, what does it do? It's a function that is going to send a fetch. What fetch does is it sends an HTTP request to whatever URL you tell it. And notice the URL, see that? /API/users. That's exactly where the ORM is waiting, right, for incoming requests. See that? Now, by default, fetch, if you don't say anything else, by default, it sends a get, right? If you want to do anything other than a get, you have to override it and say, no, I don't want you to do a get. I want you to do a post, put, a delete. And we'll do that today. So this sends a get. It sends a get to this URL API users. And then the data comes back, right, in the body. It comes back. What comes back? An array of users. So this over here is going to parse that data out and convert it back into an array, right? That can be consumed by our user interface. And that's what gets returned out of here. Then we export this so that we can use it elsewhere. Again, the assignment walks you through all this, right? You just have to copy and paste and get this up and running. Again, the intent is for you to just practice, and eventually you'll be able to do it on your own. Okay. Yeah. So what do we do? What does user list do? It declares its own, find all users function that gets kicked off by this effect over here, right? So this use effect, what it basically does is gets notified, when the component loads up first, right? And then whatever you put in here gets executed so that the component can load itself, right? Initialize itself. What does it do? It calls find all users, which uses this user service find all users, which goes out to the server, right? To the database, fetches the data, comes back, and whatever data comes back from the server, right? We store that data in a local variable users, right? Using the set users. And then down below, right, we use a simple UL, right? So that we're going to create an unordered list. That's what these are, bullets. These bullets are called unordered lists. We iterate over all the users, or this one's iterating over all the users, and for each user, it's returning a line item. Okay, line items are, bullets are made up of line items, right? So we are generating a whole bunch of line items, which includes the user ID, the first name and the last name, right? And that's what gets rendered here. Okay. Again, I don't expect you to become a React.js expert or anything like that. We're just giving you the absolute minimum tools, right, for you to become somewhat proficient and build a usable minimum set of user interfaces so that you can actually interact with the database, right? We don't expect you to do anything fancy. I mean, if you've taken a web development course and things like that, you want to and you want to explore more things, certainly go for it. But by no means are we going to. Sorry. By no means we're going to evaluate your proficiency in web development or anything like that. Okay, we're just giving you the tools for you to become productive and build something, right, useful, using, obviously, the focus of this course is databases, right? How is that we can interact with databases and use it for building useful applications. Okay. All right. So notice that each one of these we're putting inside of a link, right? And the link creates these hyperlinks, right? And these hyperlinks are encoded to. But if you click on it, if you click on it, they will put on the URL /users/ and then the ID of the user that we're rendering here, and which has been configured. That URL has been configured to navigate. See that? It's been configured to navigate to the user editor. See that? All right. So if you click on this, it navigates to the user editor, and the user editor, what it does is it parses the ID from the path. How does it know that's user ID? Well, because in the index, that's where we call the user ID. See that? So it declares a variable, right? That part of the path has a name, right? And we can retrieve it, right, using use params, and we can use it to kick off that user ID. We can use it to kick off, retrieving the ID by the user by its ID. We can go out to the server, right? This is the implementation here that generates a GET, right? Go out to the server. So this URL, which is /API/users/ and then we are appending the user ID at the end, right? So basically, we're hitting not this one, we're hitting this one down here, find user by ID, which parses the ID from the path, right? Goes out to the database, doing a select star from users where ID equal user ID, right? And then we send that one user. We send back that one user, which gets parsed out from the body, right? And then the editor takes the data from the server that came back from the database, sets the user variable, which we then use to render all these input fields, right? The values of all these input fields: first name, last name, user, blah blah blah. Okay. All right. that's everything we did last lecture. So let's go move a little further. Okay. For instance, one of the things that we might want to do is delete a user, for instance, right, or update a user, or create a brand new user. So let's talk about that, right, for the remainder hour or so. All right. So any questions we've got so far? We've basically covered the material from last lecture. If you want more in-depth, please take a look at the previous lecture for more in-depth coverage of that. All right, so let's move on. Let's do a delete. Okay, in the assignment we walk you through how to do that. DB8 interface index, retrieving all records. We did that. Retrieving a specific record. We did that too. Right, find all users. And we have the input field. So if you follow the instructions, I think you should be successful. Okay, so navigating back, we did that too. All right, deleting records from the database. Let's do that. Okay, so we already have this in the ORM, right? That talks to the server that can, if you pass it an ID, right, it can delete that user by its ID. Perfect. But now let's try and hit it, right? So we have in the ORM down below, we have this delete user. See that? And it's expecting us to send the URL and the ID of the user that we want to remove. We're going to parse that ID from the path, and then we're going to use that ID to actually use the user repository and delete from users where ID is equal to this ID. Yes? Okay, so let's do this. Let's send a delete. Notice that it's expecting a delete method, right, to that URL. Right, and that's exactly what we have here in the assignment. Right, we're going to grab this, right, and we are going to copy it into our service. So down below here, I'm just going to copy that. Okay, and let's just look at it real quick. It's a function, right, that takes as argument the ID, which it's going to use to map, right, and encode that ID as part of the URL at the end of the URL, and the URL is basically /API/user, so it's putting it at the end of that URL. And notice that this is not going to be a get, right? Because we're not retrieving data. Instead, we're asking to remove an existing record. So we don't want to use the default get. Instead, we are overriding it. And the way you override it is that you add this optional configuration object, right, to the fetch function. And we're saying that the method should not be the default get, but instead should be delete. And that's how we're sending a delete instead of a get. Okay. All right. We export this so that others can import it and use it. Right. So next in the assignment, what we're going to do is that we're going to add a brand new button, right, in the form. We're going to add a button at the bottom, so that when we click on that button, we're going to call this brand new delete user function. This delete user function is going to call the brand new delete user function that we declared in the service. And then we're going to do a history back. History back is going to navigate us back to the previous page where we were, which is the list of users. So we should see that, that user doesn't exist anymore. Okay, so let's do that. Let's copy this into the user form editor right before the return. So let's copy this. So let's go back to the user editor. All right, so right before the return, we're going to paste the delete user. See that? Now we're ready to add our brand new button. All right, so right above, let's add at the bottom. Right, let's see. There's our cancel button. Right, so I'm going to put it right below that. There's our delete button now. Right, and that delete button is going to, if we click on that button, is going to invoke delete user. Okay, so let's go back and see what we render. Let me close all these. There we go. We don't need that either. Okay, let's refresh. Okay, notice that we have that delete button now. See that? We have that delete. let's see, let's click somebody. Let's remove Bob Hope. If we say delete, it didn't seem to work. Wait a minute, let me inspect. Do we have a server running? Or maybe the server's not running. Let me run the server. Let me see the server. Oh, it is running. Let's see what it complained. Console. User server is not defined. Wait, what? User service is not defined. User service, users. Oh, I call the users service. Let me spell that correctly. Let's refresh again. Let's remove Bob, delete, and still have an error. Let's see, a component, blah, 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 blah. Network, did it send a delete? Preview, response. I think it might have worked. Let me see. Oh yeah, so it did remove it. It did remove it, but for some reason, oh, it's not back. It's go back. Ooh. Let me fix that. I think right here, this should be go back, go back. There we go. Right. So yeah, let's try it again. Let's delete someone else. Let's remove Tim Dodd. Let's refresh, make sure we have the latest code. Delete. Okay, that worked. Right. So I was able to delete, and then it goes back. Let's see. Is there a question on the chat? You are doing this all in the demo folder, but should we do it in the users file? Yeah, no, edit the files that I sent you, right? I didn't want to touch those files, and so I don't litter the code that I'm giving you. I'm doing in a separate folder. I just copied the folder that I gave you and then just renamed it to demo, right? So that I can talk to you and show you the solution as I walk through this. Yeah, now do in the files that I gave you. Okay, so yeah, we did delete. Let's now, how about creating a brand new record? Creating a brand new record, right? Someone in the chat was asking, how do we do the post, right? So let's do that. So in the DAO, right? In the ORM, let's go back to the ORM. So to create a new user, notice that it's waiting for an incoming post, not a get, not a delete, not a put, right? It's waiting for an incoming post. So the method needs to be post when it sends it over here. Also, the URL needs to be APIs used. We have that already. But here's something new. It's expecting that we pass the data, right, in the body of the HTTP request, right? So we need to do that, right? Which the ORM over here is going to parse that from the body, and it's going to instantiate a new user object, and then it's going to try to insert it into a database. And notice that it's going to return the brand new user object record that was inserted into the database, including the brand new ID of the user that we just created. Okay. All right, so we have that already. So with this, we have that. Okay, that presumably is supposed to work. So here is this is how we're going to be sending that post. Okay, so we're going to put this in the service. So let's go back to the service. And so we're going to paste it down here, down below, and let's go over it real quick. Okay, so this is a create user. It's a function that's going to take as arguments, right, a brand new object that is presumably is going to include your first name, last name, username, password, all sorts of data, right, encoded in that JSON object. And we're going to send a fetch to user's URL, which is perfect. That's exactly where it's going to kick off our, right here, this guy, right? So plus we're going to say that we're not going to, I don't want the default get, I want it to be the post, right? So there it is, there's our post. And I am going to take the user object and I'm going to convert it into a string, right? I'm going to convert it into a JSON string, okay? Meaning I'm going to make sure that it has the correct quotations, the correct commas, the correct curly brackets, square brackets, blah, 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 all that. Make sure that it's formatted correctly as a JSON. And that's going to be our payload, right? It's going to be embedded inside the body, and that's what's going to go off to the ORM, okay? I'm also going to send to the server, I'm going to tell it, hey, server, what I'm sending you, right? This is encoded in a specific format. Okay, this is not a PDF. This is not a Word document. It's not an image. It's not a song that I'm uploading. I'm not, and none of that, right? I'm telling you that you should interpret what I'm sending you, right, as being formatted as a JSON object. Okay, so here we're saying that the content type is application JSON. This is a standard. This is an international standard, right, that defines all the types of different documents. I am saying that what I'm sending you, this document I'm sending you, is formatted as JSON, which is perfect because that's exactly what the ORM is saying. So, okay, I am expecting data to come. It could be formatted as XML. It could be formatted in any number of ways, comma separated values too. Right? I need to know what the format is so I can read it, I can parse it, and then create the correct instance for the user. So that if I have a first name in the source data, I know I can map it to a if it's first name, then I can map it to a first name in the target data model, right? So there's a mapping there, so I can instantiate it. So yeah, so we're sending it. Now, this is going to wait until the server responds, right? Because the server is doing what? It's logging into the database, right? And it's finding the users table and doing an insert into the database, right? Creating the auto incremented number, right? ID, primary key. Then it's going to read that record, right? It's going to convert it into a user object and then send back the brand new record that we just created, that we just inserted. And that's what I'm going to get here in the response, right? The response says, okay, this is what the database came back with, right? This is the brand new record that was inserted. And then internally, right, I could do something with it, okay? All right, so I'm going to, and the user interface needs to do something with it, right? So let's copy that and export it so that everybody can use this, okay? So what are we going to do with that create user? So what we're doing with the create user, we're going to, what we're going to do is that we're going to first, we're going to use the same editor. So right now we're using the editor here. We're using this editor to edit existing records, right? Alice or Elon, right? So we're using this editor for editing existing records, but we want to use the same user interface. We want to use it to create records, right? As opposed to only edit existing records. So how do we do that? So the strategy is going to be that we're going to, instead of providing here, excuse me, instead of passing you an ID of an existing record, we're going to pass you a bogus ID, right? An ID that we know it's not in the database, right? And that's going to be the tip for this editor to say, I don't have to go fetch any record, right? Because I'm creating a brand new record. Yes, right? And so we're going to pass a token at the end here, right? Part of the URL. We're not going to pass an existing ID. Instead, we're going to say, I don't know, new or add or something, right? So that the editor will know not to go fetch the record from the database. Instead, to get ready because we want to create a brand new record. Okay, so that's the strategy. That's the strategy. So the strategy is going to be, we're going to add a brand new button. I'm going to add a button. Okay, and when we click on that button, we're going to tell the browser navigate to the editor, but right, instead of using an ID, right, just use some bogus token that the editor can use and know that it is not our intention to retrieve an existing record, but instead to creating a brand new one. So let's do that. Right. So actually, there's an easier way that we could have done this without the history. I'm not sure why I did it this way. You could absolutely do it this way, but let me show you an easier way. Let's see, in the user list, right? So instead, let's see, where is it? User list, there we go. Right, instead of this being a button, right, I'm going to leave it alone, right? So that you can continue and follow the instructions, which is perfectly fine. I'm just going to do it an easier way. I'm going to create a link instead. Okay. And the link, I'm going to call it the same way, add user. And I'm going to navigate to users, what's it called? Users/new. It's just a link, right? We're just going to navigate to the editor, and the editor is going to take that new and say, oh, they don't want me to, they don't want me to fetch an existing record. They want me to create a new record. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is far easier. Okay. So if we go here and go back, cancel, refresh, notice that we have this add user link as opposed to an add user button. Okay. Now, if we click on this, right, the notice that it's coming back with an error, right, because it's taking the new and saying, oh, it's new. Is there a record whose primary key is new? There isn't. Right? So the server is going to come back with an error saying, hey, what, I was expecting an integer and you sent me new. What the heck is that? Right? Notice that probably the server sent out, through an exception. Yeah, no exception. Okay, that's fine. Oh, actually, no, there was converted value. So yeah, try to convert it into the string into an integer, nested exception. Yeah, it wasn't, yeah, new. See that? So it's complaining that it's not an integer, right? That's fine. We're going to use that to our advantage, right? So what we're going to do, the strategy is that we're going to send new, which we just did. So on the editor, we're going to check to see if the ID is not new, right? If it's not new, then it must be an ID, an actual ID, and we will do the fetch, right? So if it's not new, then that means go fetch the user. If it is new, then don't fetch the user. Don't fetch anything because we're going to be creating a brand new one. Let's do that. So in the editor, right here, where we do the fetch here, right, we're going to check to see if the user ID, is not new, then do the fetch. And because we're passing new, we don't want it, right? So let's see if that works. So let's go back, cancel, let's refresh, add user. Okay, notice that it did not fetch the object. Notice we didn't get an error this time, right? It just didn't fetch anything, right? Because we have new at the end. See that? Okay, let's keep going. Now what we could do is actually, implements a brand new create button, that if we click that button, right, we're going to create, right, the user. We're going to use the user service, create user, right, which is going to do what? It's going to do a post to the server. We'll do a post to the server. Okay, so let's implement that. Let's add this over here. Let's paste that, create user. And we're going to invoke it when we click on a create button. Right, so let's add the create button at the end. Right, so we'll put a button down here. Okay. All right. So if we refresh, there's our brand new create button. Okay, there's a brand new create button, but there's one problem. Okay, this data that we're typing, is not being stored anywhere. Okay, it's not being stored anywhere, right? It's just in the input field, right? But we're not storing it anywhere in a variable or anything like that we can then take together and send it over to a server. Okay, so we do need to store it somewhere in our user interface. As we type, we have to take all those characters, right, and build an object that we can then send over to the server. So how do we do that? Okay, and this is one of the quirks that is particular to React.js. It's actually not. It could definitely be simpler, but it is what it is. And basically, what we're going to do is that we already have a variable user, right? That we were using to populate. We were using it to populate the user object that came back from the server when we retrieve a particular user by their ID. Well, we're going to use the same variable. We use the same variable, but instead of being populated from a server from a record that already exists, we're going to populate it from our user interface as we type the keyboard. If we type the keyboard, we're just going to, just populate all those, the value for the first name, the value for the last name, username, password, all that. We're going to store it in this object user. And when we click on create button, we're going to pass that user object to the create. It's going to send it over to the service, and the service is going to post it right to the server. And you're going to put that user as part of the body. Okay, so what we need to do is all these input fields, they need to not only read the value from the user object, but they need to not only read the data and so that we can populate the input field, but as we type, we need to write into the user field, right? Into the user first name fields and last name field. Make sense? Again, it could be easier, but React.js, that part, I think it's a little bit hard to grasp, right? So I'm just gonna give you what the code is and how it is, right? So anyway, so there's our input field. Basically, it's going to say, as you type each keystroke, right, the input field, as it changes every keystroke, right, we're going to update the user, our local user object. We're going to copy the old value of the user object. So any first name, last names that were already there, we want those. We don't want to change those. Right, so copy them over, but override and just update this one field, right? The first name, because that's what you're typing. You're typing in the first name. Or if you're typing in the last name, then I am updating the last name field or the username field or the password field. Okay. I'm just going to copy this, right? I'm just going to replace the code that is already there. So I'm going to do that for the input. I'm going to do that. No, not for the ID. We don't touch the ID. Leave the ID alone. So I'm just going to replace this with the code that is already there. Same thing with the last name. There it is. I'm just going to replace the code that's there. And the username. Okay, I guess we're not doing the password. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's try it out. Let's try it out if this works. Notice that also the create once it's done, it's a go back. I thought I had fixed that. This is go back. Let me see if there's any other back. Oh, I could have sworn I fixed all of them. Replace it to dot back. Should be dot go back. Match. Replace. Okay, those two. Okay. All right, so let's see if this blows up. Let's go here, replace, refresh. Let's see, let's cancel. Let's see, we got Alice, Elon, Charlie, Daniel. Let's add a new user. And let's put James Cameron. J Cameron. And let's click on create. And it didn't seem to work. Let's see. Let's inspect, see if there's any error. Console. User, I must misspell user service. This is user service. Locally, I've been calling it user service. Okay, let's refresh again. Let's type it in. So James Cameron, J Cameron. Create. All right, there it is. See that? It created James Cameron. That was not there in the database. You can verify that if we go back here and do a refresh. Notice that James was actually inserted in the database. Perfect. So it did work. Excellent. All right. So finally, let's do update. Well, deleting. Did we do delete? Yeah, we did delete, right? We did delete. We did creating a new record. And finally, we will do updating an existing record, right? So in this case, right? In this case, right, we are going into an existing record, we want to update that record. Okay, maybe we want to change the username, last name, first name, password, whatever. Now, on the ORM side, we already have the implementation, right? We already have an update here, right here, right? That is basically listening for an incoming put, right? The URL is just basically, you know, /API/user/ the ID of the record that we want to update. We parse that ID from the URL. We parse the new data that you want from that user, right? The new first name, the new last name, the new whatever, right? We retrieve the record from the database, right? Once we have that record in memory, we update their first name, last name, user, blah, blah, all those. We update it with whatever the body came, right? On any of that data that came through the body in the HTTP request, right? And then we save it back as an update to the database, right? And then we would just return that object back with new values and whatnot. Okay, all right. So let's do that. All right, so we have that already. So this just asks you to review that part, right? And then we're going to add into our user service this put, right? So let's do that. Let's go into the service. So at the end here, we're just going to do a put. Notice that we are, right, we're accepting the ID of the record that you want to update, the new values for that, to do a put, right, to that URL, encoding the ID at the end of that URL, because that's what we're expecting, right? That's what we expect in the ORM, right? That you encode the ID at the end of the URL. We send a put, we encode the new values for that record, and we stringify it and send it over to the ORM. We let them know that the ending is encoded as a JSON string, and then the database is going to come back with the new record, right, with the updated fields. Okay, we export this so that other folks can use it. So back in the user interface, right, we are going to add a new update button, right, or save button that is going to kick off that update there. See that? Okay, so let's do that. And so in the editor, right, we'll add the update user, which we want to kick off with a new button. Right, so let's add the button at the end. Add a button at the end. Okay, that when you click on that button, it calls our local function with that user's ID and the new value of the user of whatever we've been typing in our forms, right? So it calls that. It calls with the ID, new user. It uses a user's service, I guess, user service. Calls the update user, which we just wrote 2 minutes ago, right? And then it goes back. It sends it over to the server. It's updates that record, comes back, and then we go back to the user list. All right, let's see if this blows up. Let's cancel. Let's look at Daniel Craig. So there's Daniel Craig. Let's refresh. There's our save button that wasn't there before. Let's change, instead of Dan, let's say Danny. And Daniel Boone. Okay, and Boone. And let's save. Let's see if it worked. Yeah, looks like it worked, right? It updated the database, right? If we refresh, notice that indeed, even if we go in the database, which we'll see this change. So let's refresh. Notice that indeed the values were changed in the database. Okay. All right, excellent. This is the beginning, right, of what could become something fairly sophisticated and really cool. So what I was thinking of doing is expanding on this. Right? One of the things I would like to see is that not only do we want to can interact with a single table, right? But we might want to interact also with multiple tables or tables that are related to one another, right? So for instance, this is users, and users have different blogs, right? Each user has a blog. So how do you manage that? How do you manage the relationships between these? Okay, so let's take a look at that. How would we do that? Let's take a look at that. So let's try and do a little bit of what we did for the users, so that we get to practice, right? And you know, and feel more confident, right? The only way you're going to feel confident, right, on anything in life is if you practice it enough, right? You know, practice makes perfect, right? The more you practice something, right, the more you become proficient at something, and then it becomes, you have to think about it, right? You've done it so many times that, yeah, it's easy. So let's practice this again. Let's do the same thing from scratch and do it for blogs. Okay. All right. So let's do that. Let's for instance create. Let's create here in our demo. Okay. Let's create a brand new component that lists blogs. Right. Do that. So let's create this new JavaScript. This will be blog list, right? And this is going to be a brand new React component. So this is going to say, you know, const blog list. So components in React are just functions that return, you know, just snippets of HTML. So this is div, and we'll say h2 blog list, and we export this as blog list. Okay, let's see if we can navigate to this, right? And the way we navigate it, if we go home, well, first we need to create some mapping, right, that will allow us to navigate to this, right? So we can say, we'll do a route here, and we'll say that if we see blogs and it matches exactly, then we are going to render our brand new blog list component. Okay, right? And now we need a link so that we can navigate to this, right? So we need a link. So let's do that in our home component. We're going to get a brand new link. I'm just going to copy this. Okay, and this will be blogs, and this will be blog lists. Okay. All right. So let's go back here. We'll need to navigate to our home screen. Let's refresh our home screen. And notice that we have this blog list there. See that blog list? If you click on it, it doesn't work. Oh, one thing that we forgot to do is that brand new files that we create, like this brand new blog list file we just created, they all need to be declared in our index, right? So let's do that. Let's declare here. I'm just going to copy one of these. So this will be blog list. Let's refresh. There it is, our blog list. Make sense? All right. Okay, so what do we want to do with blog lists? We want to go fetch all the blogs from the server. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, let's go back to the database, right, and see if we exported all that data. I don't believe we did, right? So we have in our database, we have a table called blogs, right? It's called blogs. So let's create a data model. Let's see. The data has ID, has name, has topic, right, and has the user. Okay. So we know that this is a integer, string, integer. Okay. So let's create that. Let's create in the data model. We have the blog. So new Java class. So this is blog. Right, and what do we have? So we said private, we have an ID, integer ID. We have what else? We have name, private string name. We have topic is also string. And we have user is also an integer, so private integer user. Yeah. And we need all the setters and getters. So let's do that. So code generate all the setters and getters. There we go. So we have the data model. We'll also need the repository so that we can interact with it, right? And well, actually, we need to annotate all this, right? We need to annotate this to map to our blog table. Okay, so let's do that. We'll convert this into an entity. We'll say that this is a table whose name is blogs. We know that the ID is the primary key, so let's annotate it as the primary key. And let's annotate this as being auto-incremented. So the strategy here is identity. Okay, that's it. That's all we need to do. We have our data model. Now we want to interact with it, so we'll need a repository. Right, so let's create a repository for our blog. We'll say new. Java class is actually an interface. So this will be a blog repository. And our repository will extend a CRUD repository that is going to be CRUDing blogs whose primary key is an integer. Oops. There we go. Okay. All right. That's all we really need. Okay. Let's leave that. Now we need a DAO, right? A ORM DAO that can interact with this, right? With the table. So we'll create a new blog ORM DAO. Okay, and let's keep this simple, right? So let's do just a, retrieve all the blogs. Right? So let's do that. So we want to have we need the repository. So let's bring in the blog repository. Okay, and we'll implement the public list of blogs. Okay, and we want to find all blogs. Okay. And how do we do that? We're going to use the repository. We're going to say return whatever the repository does, right? So I think it's repository dot find all. There it is. We'll need to cast a couple things here. That's fine. We'll just cast it. There we go. It's cast. Right. Now we want to make this available to our blog list React component that wants to talk to this guy, right? So the way we do that is that we convert this into a REST controller so that it'll make this data available on the internet. And since this is a read-only operation, right? This is a read operation, then we're going to use, like the convention says, we're going to use a get mapping, HTTP get. We're going to prepend it with API or something like that, and then the name of the table that we're accessing blogs. All right, I think that's it. Right, let's restart the server. Let's see if we can retrieve the blogs. Well, let's see if there's a URL that we can retrieve all those blogs. First, we have to verify that we can do that before we ask the component, our screen, to go fetch this data. Right. Let's go back to our browser, and in a new tab, we're going to say localhost 8080/API/blogs, right? That's what we said. And that didn't work. API blogs, error, blah, 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 blah. Let's see what it was complaining about. Let's see. Null pointer, blah, 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 blah. Oh, you know something we forgot? This repository, we needed to auto wire. Let's try that again. It was saying that variable was null. Nobody ever instantiated it, right? Okay, let's try again. There it is, right? We're getting all those blogs, right? The SpaceX, the Tesla Daily. So we have 4 blogs. That's it. I thought there were more. Oh no, yeah, just 4 blogs. All right, so now we're ready to retrieve this data from our blog list, right? Component. Let's do that. So we'll basically want to be able to hit this URL, not manually like we just did. We want to do it programmatically. We want to do it from our user interface, right? So let's do that. Let's let's create here a service. Let's create a service called the blog service. So we'll call it the blog service, which is going to encapsulate all the logic to talk to the server and fetch this from the database, right? So we'll declare a blog URL, which is a string of where the data lives, right? That's where the database puts it, okay? And a function that can find all blogs, which is basically going to send a fetch over to the blog URL, and it's going to come back with the data from the database. We're going to export this so that folks can use this, right? In particular, who? The our blog list component, right? Right. So this is a brand new file. What do we do? Remember that we need to declare it in our index, right? In the index.html, right? So we need to declare that, and it's blog service. Notice that I'm declaring the blog service before the blog list. That's because the blog list is going to use the blog service, so it needs to be loaded first. Right? Anything that everybody else uses needs to be declared earlier, right? Otherwise, it won't find it. So in the blog list, now we should be able to import that service we just declared. So we can import the blog service from blog service. There we go, right? Okay, so what we want to do is that on load, we want to go fetch all that data, and we're going to have to store it in some variable, right? And so let's declare a variable where we can put all those blogs, a local state variable here, right? So those will be const blogs and set blogs from use state. Okay, we need to load use state. We need to import that. So I believe this would be const use state. I misspelled it. Use state from React. All right, so we're also going to need to we're going to encapsulate the action of retrieving all those blocks in a function here. So we call find all blogs is going to use this blog service dot find all blogs, which is going to come back with some data that hopefully it'll be that array of blogs, and we're going to put them in those blogs here using the set blogs. I'm going to say set blogs the data. Hopefully that data is the array of blogs, right? Hopefully it's this. We're hoping that is this the information, okay? Right here in blogs. Now we need to kick this off. We need to kick this off when this loads, at the first time. So how do we do that? With use effect. Use effect can notify us when we are first loading. It's kind of like a constructor. So we're going to say, use effect, the function that is going to call us. Also make sure that it doesn't go into an infinite loop. You don't need to know the details. I mean, there's a lot behind this, a lot of magic that is behind this. Again, that's a whole nother course, right? We're not going to get into all the nitty gritty, thing that happens behind the scenes, right? Again, I'm just trying to give you as many tools to get you going and for you to be productive and start building something useful. Right, so what are we going to do here? We're going to find all blogs. I'm going to kick that off. I'm going to go out to the database, going to fetch the records, right? And it's going to store it here in blogs. And just to see if this works, hopefully this blogs will be an array, right? That will have 4 elements, right? So let's print at least, the length or the size of that array. Hopefully it'll be 4. So it'll be blogs.length. Right, so let's see if we go here and refresh, and that didn't work. Let's see, boundary, blah blah blah, length. Oh, you know what? We need to initialize this as an empty array. It needs to have an initial value. 0. Okay. All right, this is somewhat promising, right? It's saying that when it tried to communicate here to this, it got rejected, right? And the reason is that the server is listening at 8080. The servers were listening at 8080, but this URL is coming from 63342. And that is considered to be a security risk. And we can, for now, right, we can just skip that, right? And just by saying that we don't really care. And we are accepting queries, requests from anybody. I don't care. I'm just open wide. Anybody can come and get this data. In reality, right, you would make sure that only certain people that you care would access this data, right? But for our purposes, this is perfectly fine. Let's we'll need to restart the server. And let's go back here. There we go, right? Presumably we got the 4 records. You can see in the network traffic back and forth between the user interface and the database. You can see that this URL right here, see that? These are the 4 blogs records that are coming, right? And they look identical to the data that we were expecting. Perfect. It's these 4 JSON pieces of objects. Perfect. Now we need to iterate and display them. Let's see, one at a time, right? So in our user interface, we can just iterate over them and just display them in a nice list. We can say UL, and we're going to iterate, right? Curly brackets allows us to escape the user interface and go back to coding, so that we can embed logic inside of our user interface. So what we want to be able to do is grab those blogs, right? Iterate over it using map. Map is just going to evaluate an expression, is going to accumulate whatever that expression returns, right? So as I iterate, right, it invokes this function, and whatever that function returns is what gets rendered, right? So basically what we're going to do is that it calls the function with each one of the items in the array, right? So in the array blogs, there are blog objects. And what we're going to do is that we're going to return line items, right, for each one of the blogs. Right? So here's line item. And the content of the line item will be whatever the blog contains, right? I don't remember what's in the blog. Let's just display the entire JSON content of the blog. Let's see if we refresh. There it is. So we have the JSON object of each one of these. Notice we have the ID, we have the name, the topic, the user, right? So let's render it, in a prettier way. Let's render each individual element, blog dot ID, comma, and then we can maybe have the name. What do we have? ID, name, topic, and user. ID. So ID, name, topic, and user. Okay, and we don't want that. So refresh. So there it is. So there's our list of blogs, right, that we can take a look at. Notice that perhaps we could link these, right? For instance, one cool thing would be that since I know the ID of the user, that could be a link that would allow me to navigate to that user, right? Would that be cool? Right? For instance, I could, that last user, because I know this is an ID, I could create that, I can make that a link, right? So this ID, where could it go? I know there is a path that takes me to the editor, right, for that user, no? And I could do to, and I believe the URL was what? Was users / and then the ID, I think it was, right? So I can say the blog.user is the ID of that user, right? Let's see if we refresh. Oops, maybe we don't have a link. I need to load that link. Where we have link, link. Let's paste it in here. Okay, there it is. So these are hyperlinks now, right? If I click on 4, notice that it goes and it allows me to edit Elon, right? Elon is the who created this blog post, right? Or 6, right? It was Daniel owns that blog, right? So we could, right, connect these components and make them related to each other, right? One of the cool things that we would like to be able to do, for instance, is maybe not load all the blogs, but instead only the blogs for Elon, right? Like if I, just like the blog can go to its parent, right? One of the things I would like to do is that from the parent, I should be able to navigate to the children, right? So that I'd be able to see, Elon's post or Daniel's post or blogs, right? Okay, so for instance, first we would need to provide the URL, the query that would allow us to retrieve the blogs for someone, right? Meaning, up to this point, we've been working with just one single table, right? Which is just that table. But we know that there's a many-to-many relationship, that users have blogs and blogs have users, right? So how is it that we can do that, right? So what we can do, in our ORM, what we'd like to be able to do is do something like, public, list blogs, right? But it would be find blogs for user, right? Right, where we could pass you the ID of the user, and then you would return the IDs of those particular blogs, right? Now, we could do that by going to the repository and implementing that query, right? That query might be something like, query, and this would be, this would be, select a star from blogs, right, where user equals, and then you pass in the ID of the user, right? So this will be user ID, okay? Right, and this is value is equal to that, and native query equal true, right? And we can wrap that around this function, right? So we could put here the function, right? And then we can map this ID to this parameter, saying that this maps to user ID, like that, okay? So now we can implement this using that query we just created, right? This would be return, right? The repository dot find blogs for user, and we give you the ID, okay? And then we can expose it. It's a read operation. It's a read operation. But notice that this basically says retrieve for me all the blogs, right? Because I'm not saying which blog. And since I'm not saying what blog, it means all of them. But if I want a set of blogs that belong to a specific person, there is a convention for that, right? Dealing with one-to-many relationship, right? That one user has many blogs. The convention is that you first prepend the context on which you want these blogs. You don't want all the blogs, you want the ones that belong to a user. So it's users, pass in the user ID as a parameter, right? So the parents and then the children, right? That's the convention. And then we can parse this. So this would be path variable user ID. Okay, well, let's try it out. Let's run this. So yeah, so this one returns all the, oops, something, yeah, this returns all the blogs, right? But if I want the blogs only from Elon or the ones from Daniel, I can use this brand new URL, right, that I can prepend here and say, users/for returns only Elon's, right, or only Daniel's. See that? Okay. Now we can use this, right, in our user interface, right, and only show certain blogs, right, for the specific user. All right, and that we'll come back to that in the next next lecture. Okay. All right, folks. That's all I have for you. I do have to prepare for the next lecture. Any questions? All right. Thank you, everyone.